Hi, my name's Cathy Millett, and this week we're looking at how I built some dioramas to demonstrate water on the Great Model Railway Challenge, which is a UK TV show. So I've just finished filming today one heat of the Great Model Railway Challenge, driven back home, and I've got 3 days before I need to be back on set, and they want me to pull together a diorama to show how I do water. First things first, I found a stream that I wanted to model, and this is a little one that runs through my village. I love it because it changes through the year, it's got a bit of vegetation, and I ended up doing multiple dioramas so that I could use them at different times of the year, and some I did with water and some I'm probably going to do with snow and ice. So the base of my dioramas is blue craft foam. You can use insulation foam, you want something a little bit dense. And I used a paper template to draw something looking like the stream in the photo. I wanted a nice steep bank and then a shallow beach area where I could put all those lovely stones and mud down. Now I had 8 hours of footage, and that's not including all the time I spent hair drying stuff to dry it off so I could get it done in the weekend. And I'm not going to run through all this at actual speed. So this is all at 50 times speed, which is why I'm whizzing through very quickly. And you can see by now I've got the hot wire tool out and I'm taking out the excess material so that I can have a nice steep bank and shallow beach on each of those dioramas. Now sometimes it isn't quite even, and you can use a sandpaper on this to get a smoother texture if you need it. If these dioramas are going to have more weight on them, I probably would put another piece underneath because there isn't a lot of foam left at the bottom. One of the key things I wanted to demonstrate on these dioramas was resin water. And resin water needs to have a dam or it will flow out. It's like water, it will just flow out at the ends. So I created a dam from overhead plastic acetate and glued it in place with silicone glue, which will all just peel off at the end. Next up was painting a base layer of paint. It's very easy to have gaps in your scenery, and this means nothing will show through except my raw umber brown acrylic. It also protects the foam a little if you're using any substances that aren't quite kosher with foam. Most solvents would fall into that category. As the next layer is also water-based, we can get straight on with that. It's actually putting a layer of tile grout on to act as earth. It has a lovely texture when it's dry. First of all, to get it to glue, I put down white glue and I brush it around with a disposable brush. Then I sprinkle on some tile grout, and then I use isopropyl alcohol and water, 1/3, 2/3, to wet that so that the glue will flow through. And then I use a dilute white glue mix, again 1/3 white glue, 2/3 water, and that flows through and sticks everything. And it's on paint pots because it might run and dribble, and this stops it sticking to the newspaper. As I was in a rush, I whipped out my hairdryer to dry everything quickly. And then I moved on to the riverbed, and I used diluted black, Mars Black acrylic paint, diluted quite thinly, and brushed it everywhere where the water would be to make it look darker, because earth always looks darker underwater. Again, hairdryer. I then moved on to my go-to product for riverbeds, Woodland Scenics Talus. It comes in a range of sizes and I build it up from large to small. It comes in a very neutral colour so you can change it to whatever you like. So once all of it was down, arranged dry, I used isopropyl alcohol and water to wet it and then diluted white glue again. You can use a tissue to mop up any extra if you put too much on. And then hairdryer it again so we get to the next level. Otherwise you just end up with too much water on your diorama. Finally, I added a wash just to tone this colour down. I actually quite like the colour, but it's just too bright. And this wash was raw umber and black paint, diluted quite a bit and put around just to make everything look a little bit muddy and not as bright, stark white. Looking at the pictures, there's actually more colours in the pebbles, and I could have spent time doing that, but this is a 3-day build, so I just added some dilute, various different colours of green, Vallejo acrylic greens, to tone it all down and match the photo. When that was done, I put in a pipe. I wanted to have some dripping, moving water in this. I didn't want it all just to be solid, so I spray painted a plastic straw and used some pigments and rust-coloured paints to add a bit of weathering. I glued them in place with super glue and kicked them to make sure they set straight away, and then covered any shiny glue spots, which unfortunately I did have, with a little bit extra tile grout. Then I had this beautiful pipe in place, but no water. So I added a strip of acetate plastic, super glued into the pipe and super glued into the stream, which acted as a curved arc so I could do my water. Now by this point everything had dried underneath, so it was finally resin water time. So I used magic water, it's a 1/3, 2/3 mix, and I used normal water measured out in a measuring cup to decide on the volumes. I then poured it in using a stick to help it pour, and those dams worked really well at keeping it from running out. Partly because I was pushed for time and partly because I wanted some of the vegetation to stick into that resin, I started on my vegetation straight away. And this was a jute string that I used. I'd cut it to the right length and shredded it into pieces. It's a great product for doing roots and branches and structures. Everything is just glued with white glue. I use Tacky Glue because it's a little bit thicker and you have a bit more working time. I kept looking at my photos and I could see there was areas of, I guess it was moss, and I represented those with ground foam, a couple of Woodland Scenics colours of ground foam. And I will have all the details of all the products I used are in the description below, so you can go and see what I used. Now at this point, there is a lot of repetition. There's a lot of roots, there's a lot of cutting, there's a lot of trimming. I did spend quite a lot of time off camera at home watching TV, I think the night before this, creating all of these roots out of jute string, where I take a little bit and twist it up and pull out each of those threads. So none of this is particularly quick. I then moved on to adding some green scenery. Now I didn't have any HO ivy material, so I made do. And actually I haven't said what scale this is. And it's practically a scaleless diorama. You could use it as a very small stream in a large scale or a larger river in a smaller scale. The leaves are about the only thing that gives it away. And I used miniature ready-made leaves on a kind of matting, and they're on quite long straight strips in that matting, so you can tear them off much like the ivy in the picture on long stems or branches. So I find it useful torn apart and used. At this point I realised I was in danger of not being able to get into my effluent pipes to add any murky water. So I added some sort of bluey grey acrylic paint to the resin that I'd left on the side. It was just some spare resin. And I dribbled it on with a stick, just a wooden stick, onto those arches of acetate. And I was able to get a really nice dirty water coming out of them. And then it sits into the other resin and just moves around a bit like a puddle. If you do this too soon in the process, that resin just disappears though. It disappears into the other resin and just merges in. So you have to wait till both of them are quite gloopy, and then you'll get that little bit sitting nearer the effluent pipe outcharge. Once that was in, I carried on adding more of this miniature material. It's actually plain and maple leaves, and a lot of the leaves spring off, and I kept every single one of them and I glued them on with tiny spots of white glue. I added more of the ground foam and glued it in place with drips of isopropyl alcohol and water and white glue. I added more detail to those effluent downpipes using acrylic gloss medium to add some depth, and also some micro balloons to add some froth at the bottom of those. Now the one thing about resin, it does like to spread, so I actually added some matte varnish to try and just dull down some of the beach area, which was too wet and shiny for my liking. And then I used some various enamel brown washes to add just more depth and colour to spots of that beach. At this point, it's time to get the photo out and just see which areas don't look quite real, and go back and add some extra details, colours, whatever it is that's needed to make your dioramas look amazing. At this point, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all those people who support me on Patreon. Your support does make a difference in how much time I can spend doing videos like this, and I really appreciate it. And if you're not supporting me already, feel free to go over there and check it out. I do some special videos. I've actually done a longer video of this where I explain what I did a little bit more detailed, because this one's quite short. And you can find me on patreon.com/Kathy Millett. And that's it, folks. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. And if you want to know the materials or tools, they're also listed below and on my website.